It is Wednesday, October 2nd, 2019. It is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and so you know what time it is. It's time for a little bit of coin metal. It was very exciting, get your ass kicked at Jiu-Jitsu Wednesday. We did a little bit of back control, a little bit of getting out of the back control. That's actually the primary focus of the day. Was getting out of that back situation, where you got somebody on your back trying to escape from that. And we did a little bit of positional sparring from there as well. And I don't know, I felt like a lot of the defenses that I've already got for that particular position are okay. Certainly do need to be beefed up, no doubt about that. But nonetheless, I felt pretty competent. And during the positional sparring, I had relatively little difficulty getting out from the situation, and so that was a little comforting, But yeah, primarily back stuff. A little bit of the position we were working. I kept getting confused on it because it was where you kind of roll into your opponent, and that is kind of against my primary tendency on that particular option, but nonetheless, it was tough to work. I definitely need a lot more of it, more reps, as if I don't need more reps of pretty much everything else too. But we take our victories where we can get them, right? But like I said, the positional sparring, I felt like I was pretty good at getting out of the particular back take situation we were in. Offensively, I did not give up a lot. I think I had two situations where my opponent was able to get out from my back control. But for the most part, I think I could have retained it if it was a more sparring situation. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I don't know why I'm having any trouble thinking about it, because the stuff that we were covering, it was relatively basic, but there's a lot of particular movements you can do from that position. You can do things like grabbing your opponent's feet and bringing them closer to you. That negates a little bit of that back take situation. And you can also scoot your buttocks forward. Do a kind of a scoot to where you pull yourself forward and pull your ribs down in between your opponent's knees, and that kind of opens up a little bit more room than you had before. It can screw you over though, because the transition from that particular one, you can get your arms trapped, and then trying to get out of a choke is even harder. But anyway, yeah. That's the kind of stuff. I guess one of the reasons why I'm having a little bit of trouble thinking about shit today is I got fucking suspended on Twitter. Can you believe that shit? I don't know what it is, but it seems like every other week or so, I'll say something to somebody that pisses them off so bad they report me, and then Twitter figures out that no, it really wasn't that bad, and this person's just flying off the handle, being a dick or whatever. Or it's just Twitter trying to get my phone number. But I'm not going to associate my phone number with my Twitter account. I do not trust them with that information. I never had to have a phone number to start up a Twitter account. I should not need one now. So they can just bite me. If it comes down to it, I'll either use a burner phone or just simply not use Twitter anymore. And that would suck, because I use Twitter a lot. And that would be some big section of my day I'd have to dedicate to something else. Wouldn't that be a shame, right? Anyway, let's go ahead and throw down into some music. And I got some new Fear Factory, but I don't want to start off with that. Because, we normally start off with body count. That's just how we roll. And so, let's go ahead and get up there to body count. Oh, and I got me new speakers. So, hopefully we'll be sounding a little bit better today. I was using the speakers in my TV, and goddamn, do they suck. I don't know what it was. I had a power outage or something, or a power surge, and it caused my speakers to die. I don't understand how that works, but they no longer functioned after that, so had to replace them. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw into some music here. And as far as where we're going to go, let's go with a little bit of body count, as we normally do. First Dance, No Lives Matter, here on Coin Metal. And that was Prong with Worst of It. Yeah, that wasn't intentional, but you know what? I had to get a shower in. You know, that's terribly important if you're doing a lot of jiu-jitsu or other high-contact sport. And you know, it's just you're looking out for your own bunghole there. You know, trying to keep it unfunkified, and don't want to get other people's funk. You know, I mean that's how it is. People got funk. You know, I mean, I would like it to not be that way, but we're biological organisms, and biological organisms pick up funk of all types. Anywho, as far as what we're going to get into today, I want to start off with something a little bit different, but I need to get just a teeny tiny bit caffeinated here. If you can hold on with me one moment here, I gotta make a mild adjustment. Get my tea, because I love tea, man. I don't know what it is. Anywho, what we're getting into today, we're going to step a little bit off of the crypto trail, because I think this is really important. You know, any tools that you see that are available to people, it's really important to take note of how they use them, even if they're using them against other people. Because you can assure yourself that if they become terribly effective in one sector of, say, law enforcement, the chances of them being exploited against you is much higher, or utilized against you is much higher. And it's one of the reasons why I refuse to give Twitter my phone number, because the associations that intelligence agencies and even hackers can get from just one little article of information, such as your phone number, is myriad, and it can subject you to a lot of risks that you don't necessarily need to undertake. But anyway, like I said, there's standards and practices, and once they become standard practices, you know, any tool that's utilized against one entity could be utilized against you. And this is just a side note here. This is one of the facts about the use of drones in warfare and, of course, civil enforcement and whatnot. That I think that the public really should have been much more against it, and should be far more against it, because the fact of the matter is that the United States, with its foreign policy, has set the standards that will be utilized in the next conventional conflict. You know, all this proxy war bullshit, it's all fun and games until a nation decides to declare war on you because of it. And then it becomes a problem. Because all of the rules that you set forward in your proxy war are going to be the ones that are utilized against you. And we are not the only manufacturers of drones on the planet. As a matter of fact, they make a hell of a lot of them in China. You know, so again, you know, it's and same thing with digital surveillance techniques. You know, when you're using them in, say, the pursuit of illegal aliens, you know, people that shouldn't even be here to begin with, and coincidentally, the people that Americans as a whole will probably feel least bad about the techniques being used and the technologies being used. However, And this is the problem. If they become too effective, if ICE and other organizations are able to track down illegal aliens with surgical precision, all of a sudden other enemies of the state, critics, whistleblowers, people that don't necessarily agree with what's going on, could potentially become targets, and these tools used against them. And I think this is very important and something that most people should be taking more note of. I mean, especially if you are online. If you're using the internet, you're exposing all kinds of information about yourself out there, and there are people that value it enough to pay for it and or steal it. So anyway, got this article here. It's on NewYorkTimes.com or NYTimes.com. How ICE picks its targets in the surveillance age. After two officers came... Oh, I'm not going to read this snippet. And this is by Mackenzie Funk. Oh man, that could go either way. Check and verify something here. Damn it. No link. Check and verify. Oh, damn it. No, just wants to share. Anyway, Mackenzie Funk, we're just going to go with female, so no penis. Sorry, Mackenzie, if you're a male, you should do something to indicate that. Anyway, this is authored on October 2nd, 2019 at 5 a.m. Eastern Time. The winter after Donald Trump was elected president, strangers began appearing in the parking lot on southern Washington state's Long Beach Peninsula, at the port where the oyster boats come and go. Rather than gaze at the bay or the boats or the building-sized piles of bleached shells, two men, one thinner, one thicker, stared at the shellfish workers. The strangers sat in their vehicle and watched the workers arrive in their trucks. They watched the workers grab their gear and walk to the docks. The workers watched them watching too, and they soon began to realize that the men were from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. When the workers made eye contact, the officers nodded politely, but they said very little. For weeks, they just watched. Then the workers began to vanish. Officers got someone at a restaurant in the town of Long Beach. They got someone else in a pre-dawn takedown at the port. They arrested a man early one morning in nearby Ocean Park and spent the rest of the day looking for another in the town of Chinook. Then, another day, they went back to the port for another morning arrest. The men from ICE made courtesy phone calls to the local authorities at the Pacific County Sheriff's Office before making arrests, and local ACLU volunteers later obtained recordings of the calls, so it is possible to reconstruct the officers' growing familiarity with the peninsula and its residents. "Yes, ma'am," the thinner one said in a call recorded on that January. "My name is Officer Lonnie Miller with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We're going to be conducting an arrest out in the Nakota Boat Basin area this morning." The sheriff's dispatcher sounded confused. "In where?" she asked. Nakota? Near Ocean Park," Officer Miller said, trying different pronunciations. The site was named after an 1800s Chinook leader who had been friendly with the white settlers. Nakata, the dispatcher said, gently correcting him. The officer continued to struggle in February. The Nakota, the Tidelands area, he said in one call. The Nakota Boat Basin, Nakota. I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly. But as spring turned to summer, Miller was learning to talk like a local. "I don't have a specific address, but it's the Port of Peninsula, up in Nakota." And he and his partner, a deportation officer named M. Curtis Dietz, were turning their attention to the inland neighborhoods of the peninsula where the workers lived with their families. Miller and Dietz could drive from the Ocean Port to Ocean Park. Drive from the port to Ocean Park, a village of 1,600 people, in about 5 minutes. Much of the drive took them along Bay Avenue, a broad thoroughfare that cuts across the 2-mile-wide peninsula, connecting the shallow, oyster-rich waters of Willapa Bay on the east side to the thundering surf of the Pacific Ocean on the west side. Small businesses flanked the avenue. A hardware store, a bank, a taco stand, a grocery store called Okies, a restaurant catering to the retirees who have settled in beach cabins and Cape Cod-style homes. Eventually, the officers began spending more time around 1925 Bay Avenue, an apartment complex and trailer park known as Tia Juanita. They lurked in a revolving fleet of unmarked cars, a blue Hyundai SUV, a gold Ford Taurus X, a muscle car residents remember as a Ford Mustang, outfitted with aftermarket flashing light bars. Twice in April and twice more in June, Miller called the sheriff's dispatcher to say they were parked just outside the trailer park conducting surveillance. The officers were looking for people, and seemingly for specific people. For the peninsula's Spanish-speaking families, this fact led to some urgent questions. How were the officers picking their targets, and how did they find them? To arrest someone, ICE had to know who was who, and who was undocumented, and who lived where, and who drove what. But how could its officers know all this? As families waited for answers, they hid more often in their homes, drawing the blinds, skipping volleyball games and birthday parties. But life went on. In early June, from the safety of one of the Tia Juanita apartments, a woman named Gladys Diaz Tadeo, the mother of 3 young daughters, posted a photo on Facebook of her family's latest art project, a smiling piñata in the shape of a cupcake, which her proud 4-year-old struggled to hold up for the camera. Comments came pouring in. "Cui bonitas," wrote one neighbor. "Do you make them yourself?" Diaz's sister Maria answered for her. "Yes, she makes them. She made me this." And God damn it, somebody keeps messaging me, I think. I can't tell from where. I hate that. I hate it when that happens. Is it on Facebook? I can't tell. There's no alarm, no alerts there. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Credit card sometime. Yeah, bullshit. Bullshit. Oh, Jesus Christ. I swear, man. Some people in tech, they kind of bug me in their, I don't know, I want to say ineptitude. It's not that they're stupid. It's just that I don't know. I think they don't pay attention to shit. I mean, I used to work in a customer. You know what? I'm gonna write that back to him. Oh Jesus! Sorry about this. I used to work in a ATT call center. I know all of the information customers associate with their phone number. Alright, there we go. Got that resolved. Alright, so here we go. The cupcake was for sale, $20, but there was no immediate buyer, and Diaz's post, visible only to the roughly 10,000 other members of Chinookville, a private buy/sell Facebook group for the region, soon moved down the feed. It was very likely that Diaz was already a target when she posted the piñata, very likely that ICE already knew her full name and address, and license plate number and social media handles, had mapped out her family members' names, their social media handles. When not in the field, Miller, Dietz, and their colleagues spent long days at their computers at the ICE office in Portland, Oregon, 2 hours from the peninsula, gathering intelligence and building target lists, some for daily operations, some for nationwide raids like those Trump repeatedly advertised this last summer. Because Diaz had been caught a decade earlier trying to enter the country with a fake green card, she successfully slipped in the next day. She would have been marked as a priority for deportation. On June 23rd, Miller and Dietz woke before dawn, as they frequently did, and began driving north up the peninsula, possibly from the tourist town of Long Beach, where they overnighted at the Best Western. The air was still that morning, and the spring rains had finally stopped, and by the time the officers pulled off the road near Tijuana, the sun was coming up. They began watching cars go by. One of the first to pass, a white pickup on its way to the port, was driven by Diaz's longtime boyfriend and American-born girl's father, Baltazar Alberto Gutierrez, who is better known as Rosas. He recognized the officers and waved to them out of the window, an act of quiet defiance. They waved back, Rosas said. For most of the next few hours, according to the sheriff's dispatch records, Millers and Dietz kept sitting there. At 9:57 a.m., Miller called in to say they were clearing out. As apparently happened in April and again earlier in June, they were leaving empty-handed. But 18 minutes later, he called back. "Sorry to keep bothering you guys," he said, chuckling apologetically. "That's okay," the dispatcher replied. "We're headed back up to Ocean Park," he said. "We think our person is going to be heading over to the Bank of the Pacific." When Rosas returned home, a little after 10 a.m., he found Dietz loading the piñata and their daughters into her car. Someone on Facebook had just responded to her ad. It was a person using a Hispanic name who didn't seem to speak much Spanish. Someone she'd never met, whose profile picture was of a dog. When she tried to find the page again a few weeks later, it was gone. She was meeting the person next to Okies at the Bank of the Pacific. Quote, "Why don't they just come here?" Rosas asked her. Quote, "Gladys, wait, don't go," he yelled after her as she drove off, but maybe she didn't hear him. Miller and Dietz were waiting when Diaz pulled up to the bank. "Are you Gladys Diaz?" one asked. They showed her a printout, and they had somehow obtained of her Washington state driver's license. Her girls began to cry. Quote, "I don't want them to take you," the oldest screamed. Diaz tried to calm her. "You don't need to get upset," she whispered. "It's nothing. Let's see what happens." Some Peninsula residents arrested by ICE got to pay a bond, $10,000, $15,000, maybe $20,000, and were released back into the community as they waited months or years for their day in immigration court. But Diaz, with her previous deportation on record, would not be one of them. The officers handcuffed her, and 24 hours later, Diaz was in a private detention center near Seattle. 3 weeks later, she was deported to Mexico, where she began bouncing among relatives' homes in her native Jalisco, separated by 2,600 miles from her daughters. Continuing on. 2. Felons, not families. The business of deportation, like so much else in the modern world, has been transformed by the power of big data. There are 10.5 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States, according to the Pew Research Center. But there are only about 6,100 officers in ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations, ERO Division. The roughly equivalent number of special agents in ICE's other main division, Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, have historically focused on transnational crime rather than immigration violations per se. This is changing. There are 50 states for ICE to cover, as well as Washington and U.S. territories like Puerto Rico, more than 3.8 million square miles. There are continuing staffing shortages at the agency, where job satisfaction, while on the rise under Trump, remains notably low. And there is relentless pressure from the White House to deport people. So, ICE tries to find efficiencies where it can, and it uses technology. Some of it built for consumers, some of it built for spies or the police, to do more with less. A spokesperson for the agency said it would not comment on its investigative techniques, and the agency has declined to respond to many questions for this article. But public records make clear that ICE, like other federal agencies, sucks up terabytes of information from hundreds of disparate computer systems, from state and local governments, from private data brokers, and from social networks. It piggybacks on software and sharing agreements originally meant for criminal and counterterrorism investigators, fusing little bits of stray information together into dossiers. The work is regulated by only a set of outdated privacy laws and the limits of the technology. Tracking immigrants in this country is an increasingly trivial exercise because it's an increasingly trivial exercise to track any of us. The same phenomenon helped make the reporting for this article possible. Over the course of more than a year, I tried to reverse engineer individual ICE officers' use of America's vast post-September 11th domestic surveillance apparatus, tracing their hunt for targets down to the very searches they entered into their computers. Based on hundreds of government procurement records, dozens of interviews, and thousands of pages of documents I and others obtained via public records requests, the account that follows reveals new evidence of surveillance of detainees' voice and video calls at ICE facilities and extensive proof that the agency relies on state DMV databases and information products like Clear from Thomson Reuters to target immigrants. It shows how the Real ID Act of 2005, along with funding from the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and help from umbrella groups like the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, AAMVA, has laid the groundwork for real-time, real-world monitoring of American residents. It's still a partial view, but it's enough to show the scale of the machine. ICE's transformation began under President Barack Obama, criticized by activists as the deporter-in-chief. Obama indeed removed more than 3 million people from the country, including in 2013 what remains the annual record of 432,448 people. But part of the spike he oversaw was an accounting trick. Near the southern border, migrants caught trying to cross were increasingly subject to formal removal proceedings, and thus officially counted in statistics, a change from previous administrations. Away from the border, Obama tried to shift ICE's priorities. He curtailed the agency's long-standing practice of workplace raids, and active pursuit was now largely limited, especially during his second term, to convicted criminals, suspected gang members or terrorists, and people apprehended at the border. The administration also discouraged so-called collateral arrests, in which ICE came looking for one person and instead nabbed a neighbor or a co-worker. The lowest priority were long-term residents with American children or spouses. Quote, Felons, not families, Obama explained in a 2014 speech. Criminals, not children. Gang members, not a mom who is working hard to provide for her kids. ICE now needed systems that could more intelligently parse priority targets from the general population of millions of undocumented immigrants. Under Obama, the agency signed several key data and analytics contracts that have since drawn controversy, including with Thomson Reuters, the Silicon Valley firm Palantir, and the Beltway startup Giant Oak, and it relied ever more on local federal data sharing initiatives that flourished after September 11th. Information that was once siloed or tedious to access, driver's license photos, phone records, jail bookings, was increasingly at deportation officers' fingertips. One of Trump's first acts as president was to throw out his predecessor's priority list. He issued Executive Order 13,768, enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States, on his sixth day in office. Quote, "We cannot faithfully execute the immigration laws of the United States," the order reads, "if we exempt classes or categories of removable aliens from potential enforcement. Data once used to focus on prioritized groups could now, in theory, be used against anyone, and individual officers now had a freer hand to pursue their own priorities." The results were predictable. Both the percentage and the sheer number of arrests by ICE of people without criminal convictions shot upward. There were 58,010 such arrests during the administration's first 14 months, according to an analysis by NBC News. Nearly 3 times as many as during the preceding 14 months. Statistics compiled by Syracuse University's Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, meanwhile, show a significant rise in immigration cases involving long-term residents. In an interview before her retirement this year, Elizabeth Godfrey, ICE's acting field officer director for the Pacific Northwest region, pointed to another reason the profile of its arrestees had changed. A series of pre-Trump court decisions, notably one made by a federal judge in Oregon in 2014, led a growing number of jails across the country to stop honoring ICE requests that they notify the agency of pending releases or hold immigrants beyond their scheduled release dates. This, together with sanctuary policies in a growing number of jurisdictions, cut off deportations officers' easiest source of arrests, driving them to new hunting grounds. Officers working out of Godfrey's Portland office, which was shut down for more than a week by protests last year, still carefully prioritized their targets, she said. They studied them in advance. Before attempting an arrest, they completed a form, the Field Operations Worksheet, and had it approved by 2 layers of supervisors. When given a choice, they would always pursue someone with a serious criminal history rather than someone without. But that wasn't always the choice. Targeting decisions also depend on who's findable. And today, who's findable depends on who has left a trail for the officers to follow. People with driver's licenses, people with car insurance, people with utility bills, people who pay U.S. taxes, people with social media accounts, people with stable homes, people with American-born children, people who live American lives, people who once thought, if only for a moment, that they weren't on the list. Quote, "We still have a job to do," Godfrey told me. "We still have a mandate. So where are we going to locate these people? At a place of employment or at their home or anywhere else we can find them." 3. They knew who I was. The first person outside the Pacific County's Mexican community to notice the ICE crackdown was Aaron Glenn, a soft-spoken high school teacher whose family has lived and farmed in the area for 5 generations. In 2015, after years of little noticeable ICE activity, a man she'd known for decades was suddenly picked up and deported. At first, Glenn, who studied Spanish in college and later taught English to recent immigrants, let doubts creep in. Quote, "It's the feds," she says. "I thought they must know something about him I didn't." But the next year, as Trump campaigned and soon won the presidency on promises to clamp down on immigration, ICE arrested at least 8 more of Glenn's neighbors and friends, and she saw a trend. She began to privately tally the names of the people who had disappeared. The arrests seemed to accelerate, and the list became more detailed: how people were taken, where they were taken, when they were taken, and whom they left behind. In March 2017, Glenn attended a community meeting to tell her fellow residents about the disappearances in their midst. Quote, "I have the names," she declared. "I created a spreadsheet. It's real. The group, a few dozen people organizing under the banners of Living Liberally and ACLU, Power People, and most of them white and female, many of them retirees, decided to do something about it. They raised money to help pay legal fees for the newly detained and buy food and pay rent for the families they left behind, eventually forming their own non-profit, Pacific County Immigrant Support. According to Glenn's tally, Gladys Diaz was ICE's 22nd local arrest. She was the second woman. She was the first mother of young children. In the tense days that followed, Glenn made a phone call to an old friend, Sydney Stevens. Stevens lives up the peninsula in Oysterville, a tiny village founded in part by her great-grandfather in a stately 1869 house overlooking Willapa Bay. A teacher for 41 years, she is a local historian and the author of 19 books on the area's settlers, tribes, farms, and railroad. She writes a popular blog and has a column in the regional newspaper, the Chinook Observer. She has a platform, and Glenn, who in normal times tends toward privacy, desperately wanted a platform. Quote, "You need to do something," she told Stevens. Over lunch the next day, Glenn and Stevens developed a plan. Glenn would make introductions and serve as translator, as Stevens wrote a series of profiles for the Chinook Observer of the people taken and the families who remained. Their first visit was to Gladys Diaz's sister, Maria, who in Stevens' description was slight and young, all eyes, and was holding her 2-year-old son when she opened the door. 3 months had passed since her husband, Miguel, was arrested, and now ICE had Gladys too. Maria was preparing paperwork and selling off their possessions so that she and her children, who were U.S. citizens, could join Miguel in Mexico. She worried ICE would arrest her before they could depart on their own. Quote, "I am afraid every day," she told Stevens. She met the ICE officers who arrested him, she said. It was Miguel's payday, and they took him home before driving him to detention so he could deliver his family his last paycheck. They were polite, she said. She told Glenn and Stevens a variation of what they would hear time and again in their interviews. Quote, "They knew who I was." How ICE knew what they knew remained a subject of great debate on the peninsula. Washington is one of 14 states that allow undocumented people to obtain driver's licenses, and some Pacific County residents suspect that an employee of the Department of Licensing (DOL) office in the town of Iwaco, a man who always asked a lot of questions when immigrants came in, was the mole. A DOL spokesperson said that such behavior would be a violation of department policies and that the agency had no evidence of it occurring. Others suspected that ICE received help from the sheriff's office or the Long Beach police, contrary to the spirit of Washington State's sanctuary policy. The People Power activists filed public records requests, but the files that came back, including the sheriff's emails and audio of Officer Miller's courtesy calls to dispatch, suggested that local authorities were largely in the dark. A continuing mystery left everyone spooked. One activist told me about a police car parked near her house after she filed a records request. A woman whose family members were undocumented said she heard clicking sounds on her cell phone, and she was careful about what she said in case the calls were being monitored. Glenn's son has a Hispanic first name. His father was born in Mexico, and now she sometimes caught herself wondering if she could have named him something else, or should have named him something else. One rainy night, the two of them were driving home after dark in her weathered SUV, and the headlights behind her seemed to follow her every turn. She pulled onto a side street, and the car behind her did too, and she returned to the main road, and it did too. So she and her son went instead to her parents' place, where she parked in the driveway with her heart pounding. They stayed the night. The creeping paranoia sometimes seemed ridiculous to her, and sometimes it didn't, because people kept vanishing. Quote, "One moment they're living life," Glenn told me, "and then they're gone. Their car is just sitting on the side of the road. It feels like a death." The third of the 14 profiles Stephen wrote for the Chinook Observer, a series called Stories from the Heart, that would go on to help the paper win statewide journalism honors, featured Rosas and his girls, waiting at home while Diaz sat in the detention center. The ICE officers had walked the family back to the apartment to return the girls to Rosas. Quote, "Why don't you just take all of us?" he recalled saying to them when we later spoke. Quote, Why don't you take me and leave Gladys? Why do you do this in front of my girls?" He remembered one of the officers. Miller and Dietz are both known to show detainees small acts of kindness, like loosening handcuffs that aren't actually that tight, saying he was sorry. Quote, "I'm sorrier," Rosa said. Neither deportation officer would speak with me when I called their cell phones. Dietz did stay online long enough to ask how I had his private number, which I obtained from a data broker. But Dietz detailed the encounter with Rosas in a written report. The subject, quote, "appeared visibly nervous," he wrote. It was clear that his native language is Spanish. He noted that Rosas had asked to be taken instead, indicating that Rosas too was undocumented, but, quote, ICE deportation officers did not arrest him at that time due to humanitarian reasons. An agency spokeswoman explained in a statement, quote, "so he could care for family members." In a December 2017 internal email recently obtained by the rights group Detention Watch Network and Magente, Matthew Albence, the then head of the ERO and now ICE's newest acting director, gave a blunter version of the same explanation. His agency had just been contacted by the office of Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, who wanted to discuss the case of Diaz and Rosas. Quote, "The mother was a fugitive and was being arrested," Albence wrote to members of his staff. "We could have arrested the man at the time and left the children as wards of the state. I don't think that's a practice the governor would like us to start." 4. Hot lists. The first evidence that ICE's data harvesting relied on something other than rogue Department of Licensing employee was an explosive Seattle Times article in early 2018. Brad Benfield, an assistant director at DOL, confirmed to the newspaper that Nina Shapiro that when deportation officers emailed the department's fraud unit to inquire about a target, the unit gave them whatever it had: photos, and even, crucially, driver's license application forms, which included key details like place of birth and whether, for instance, a Mexican passport had been used to prove identity. In hundreds of partially redacted emails I acquired from the department, including its correspondence with Officers Miller and Dietz, fraud unit's employees seemed harried as they field dozens of queries a day from a variety of federal and state agencies. Quote, "Here is your request," one writes over and over. "Here is your request. Here is your request. Here is your request." Inslee effectively made Washington a sanctuary state in February 2017 in a response to Trump's Executive Order 13,768. But now, a year later, one of his own agencies was revealed to be feeding information to ICE. The Seattle Times article caused a local uproar. One top DOL official immediately resigned, and the department's longtime director soon followed. But the emails to and from the fraud unit, my reporting shows, were just the beginning. ICE also had a direct line to DOL's main database. Using a computer interface known as Driver and Plate Search, or DAPS, Miller and Dietz and dozens of other immigration officers ran tens of thousands of searches before DOL, facing pressures from rights groups, journalists, and the governor's office, cut off their access last year. The department opened up DAPS to outside users after September 11th to replace the human team it had kept on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to field queries from the police and federal agencies. Now investigators could log in and run their own searches. The system's modern interface and flexible search for partial plate numbers, for street addresses without exact house number, for phonetic matches to a name, appears to have made it favorable over older systems such as NLETS, originally known as the National Law Enforcement Teletype System, a network shared by 45,000 agencies in the United States and Canada. By the time people started disappearing from the Long Beach Peninsula, FBI officers had accounts, and federal marshals had accounts, and local sheriffs had accounts, and ICE officers used it again and again, nearly every day, at all times of the day. According to search logs I obtained through public records requests, deportation officers covering Pacific County and the rest of western Washington ran at least 102,769 queries through the system in 2016 and 2017, most of them after Trump took office, including 9,747 in the last 2 months of his presidency. 5,415 for names, and 4,332 for plates. One unidentified ICE employee even logged in at 2:34 a.m. on New Year's Day 2017, spending most of the next hour running searches on 6 plates and 11 names. Officers Miller and Dietz, whose beat also includes parts of Oregon, which DAPS doesn't cover, used the system regularly in 2017. Together, they searched it 4,542 times. They searched it 67 times in the 24 hours before Gladys Diaz was arrested. Roughly half of their searches in 2017 were for names, not plates, implying that they already knew whom they were looking for and simply needed an address or other information. But many days, perhaps the days the officers sat at the side of the road and watched traffic pass, perhaps the days they cruised parking lots outside restaurants or seafood processors or apartment buildings, perhaps the days they saw drivers they decided looked foreign, the searches followed a telltale pattern of a fishing expedition. Plate, 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 plate. Under Trump, the fishing has only become easier. In December 2017, as first reported by the technology website The Verge, ICE gained long-sought access to the world's largest privately run database of license plate scans. More than 5 billion historic images captured continually and automatically, thousands per minute, by infrared devices attached to lampposts and police cars and repossession agent vehicles across the United States. Plates are scannable because DMVs now design them that way. I'm sorry, let me get that better. Plates are scannable because DMVs now design them that way. In a 2012 AAMVA Best Practices Guide, partially funded by ICE's sister agency within DHS, Customs and Border Protection, AAMVA advises its members to use opaque links and retroactive surfaces and to always keep letters. Oh, shit. Always keep letters and numbers away from any bolt holes that could confound the machines. The database ICE uses is run by Vigilant Solutions, a California company recently acquired by Motorola that has agreements with more than 1,000 law enforcement agencies nationwide. ICE's roughly $200,000 a month contract, a previous version, was batted down over privacy concerns during the Obama administration, lets deportation officers map immigrants' daily rhythms with true granularity. Now they can see precisely when and where vehicles of interest have been spotted during the previous 5 years. And they can upload 2,500 plate hot lists that trigger immediate iPhone alerts whenever a target is scanned by a camera in the network. As computer vision improves, ICE has become interested in another DMV data trove, data images of our faces. Washington, like nearly all states, is now using facial recognition software to find duplicate driver's licenses and root out identity fraud, a technological leap made possible by DHS funding, AAMVA guidelines, and a provision in 2005's controversial Real ID Act that requires license photos to be digital and thus easily stored and shared. Internal DOL records reported here for the first time show that until January 2018, the department repeatedly fed the resulting instances of what it had determined by an investigation to be fraud to ICE and other federal agencies, including one partly redacted file titled Facial Recognition Spreadsheet 3 that may contain the name of someone in Pacific County. In early June 2019, as first reported by the Washington Post, Georgetown University's Center on Privacy and Technology released documents revealing that at least 2 more states, Utah and Vermont, have run face searches against their driver's license databases on behalf of ICE. There are surely others. AAMVA offered facial recognition guidelines to its members, every DMV in the country, in 2015. Quote, "One of the benefits of using a facial image is the biometric," it argued, is that unlike a fingerprint, acquisition of the biometric image is unobtrusive. Surveillance works best when you don't notice it. In Pacific County, Aaron Glenn and Sidney Stevens worried that they had revealed Rosas' identity to ICE by printing his first name and nickname in the Chinook Observer. But Rosas had registered and insured his white truck under his own name, following the law, and he had a legal Washington driver's license. By the time Stevens published the interview, Miller and Dietz had run the truck's plate through DAPS at least 7 times. So no, it wasn't your fault, dude. 5. A veneer of objectivity. And the reoccurring fear in Pacific County was that some unknown person, the sheriff, a local informant, was secretly behind ICE's arrests. The reoccurring fear among rights groups in the other Washington in the District of Columbia was quite the opposite. That immigration decisions would soon be so automated as to effectively cut humans out of the loop. Exhibit A, as the new administration took control of the Capitol, was Extreme Vetting Initiative. The initiative was ICE's attempt to bring an ill-defined Trump campaign promise to life using artificial intelligence. The agency introduced it in a 2017 Industry Day, July 2017 Industry Day in a Marriott conference room near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, inviting a flock of technology firms and beltway contractors. The event's host was the Counterterrorism and Criminal Exploitation Unit, an office within HSI that scrutinizes visa applicants and visa holders before and after they arrive in the United States. The guests, according to a sign-in sheet obtained by The Intercept, were a parade of billion-dollar companies: Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis, IBM, Booz Allen Hamilton, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, along with various smaller newcomers, including the social media monitoring startups Giant Oak and Babel Street. To build the system it wanted, ICE expected to award one or some of them to a contract worth $100 million or more. Interest was so high that the Marriott event, eventually planned for 1 day, had to stretch to 2. The goal of the Extreme Vetting Initiative was, quote, determinations via automation, ICE explained to the attendees. It sought partners whose algorithms could scan social media and other publicly available information to assess whether an immigrant was likely to become, quote, a positively contributing member of society, or whether he or she intended to, quote, commit criminal or terrorist attacks. Written text would be analyzed for sentiment, Facebook posts for aberrant thoughts, emojis for signs of criminality. The system would replace CTC-EU's human analysts and, quote, generate a minimum of 10,000 investigative leads annually. In early 2018, ICE seemed to retreat from the Extreme Vetting Initiative, which has since been renamed the Visa Lifecycle Vetting Initiative. The contract for $102 million went to CSRA, a beltway giant already doing work for ICE that has since been purchased by General Dynamics. The company employed more than 100 analysts, ensuring that people would still be firmly in charge of the vetting of other people, but the retreat procurement documents show was partial at best. HSI had already begun testing automated social media profiling under Obama, and many of the technology companies that showed up at ICE's Marriott event were already working on it. In 2016, ICE paid a broadband provider $50,400 to strengthen CTC-EU's open-source social media exploitation capabilities, as well as future growth by adding fiber optic internet. For the social media capabilities themselves, it paid $1.4 million that year and has and has since paid millions more to Giant Oak, a rapidly expanding 30-person analytics firm in Virginia that was founded by the behavioral economist and former CBP chief of staff, Gary Schiffman. My apologies there. One of Giant Oak's early contracts was for a DARPA quantitative counterinsurgency project in Afghanistan. 2 years ago, Forbes reported on the company's work with ICE and detailed its flagship product, Ghost, short for Giant Oak Search Technology, which allows users to search the dark web and social media to create, quote, a dossier on each individual with everything you need to know, such as web page images and keywords already highlighted. When I met Schiffman in a pub in Georgetown last year, he confirmed that the company worked for HSI, vetting visa holders and visa applicants, but not for ERO. Its technology wasn't in the hands of domestic deportation officers like Miller and Dietz. He made clear that he didn't want to live in a country that indiscriminately rounded up foreigners, but if public safety was the goal, the answer wasn't to stop scanning people's data. It was to do it the right way. Quote, now this is my theory, he told me, and you tell me if it's crazy or wrong, but I think it's the better we have the entity resolution. That is, the better we can compile and measure people's data, the less of a surveillance state we'll have. Once the machine is perfect, as long as you're following the rules, you won't even know it's there. That's bullshit. Who defines what the fucking rules are? 6. So we ended up arresting him. Let me get a sip of this really quick here. A week after ICE's Extreme Vetting Initiative event, computers delivered what could be considered a new kind of collateral arrest to Pacific County. Mario Rodriguez, a bilingual teaching aide in the local schools, matched none of the agency's stated enforcement priorities, even under Trump. He appeared on ICE's radar earlier that summer. Miller wrote in his arrest report the 2 deportation officers had been, quote, conducting an investigation into a separate individual at his apartment complex, and they used DAPs to run the plates of the vehicles parked in the lot. 3, including a black Jeep, were registered to Rodriguez. Armed with his name, the officers then made a, quote, biographic search of immigration and criminal history databases, which showed that Rodriguez entered the United States legally on a visa in 2005. A visa overstay is a civil offense, and Rodriguez has no criminal record. But here he was, bird in hand, man in database. So soon after Miller wrote, quote, a field operations worksheet was completed, adding him to their list of targets. Rodriguez is watchful and deliberate, and seems younger than his 51 years. A generation of Pacific County students knows him as Maestro Mario, and at the time of his arrest, he was about to return to university to receive his teaching degree so he could finally have his own classroom. In his former career in Mexico, where he earned a degree in information science, Rodriguez worked various security and public safety jobs. He had a U.S. visa because he once went on a business trip to Silicon Valley to visit Cisco Systems. He liked what he saw. Quote, I always wanted to come here, Rodriguez told me. It was my American dream. Rodriguez is gay. In Mexico, he says, he could not be. During high school, he changed his voice to, quote, sound more like a man and avoid bullying, and in 2000, fearing he would lose his job if he remained suspiciously single, he married a woman. In 2003, he found out he had HIV. He contracted the disease before his marriage, and during a clinic visit, the doctor outed Rodriguez to his wife and declared that he was paying the consequences. To be gay and HIV positive in Mexico and dependent on doctors like that for his medication was untenable. Rodriguez soon decided. So he got on a plane to the United States and cleared customs without incident. When he arrived in the Long Beach Peninsula where his brother already lived, he felt welcome. It was a Thursday morning a dozen years later, sometime after 10 a.m., when Rodriguez passed Miller and Dietz in Long Beach on his way to the post office. They recognized his car. Quote, "You always keep it so clean," he says they later told him, and began to follow him. At 10:32, Dapp's logs show Dietz ran his plate again, perhaps just to make sure. When Rodriguez pulled into the post office parking lot, the two officers did too. As Rodriguez walked inside, Miller called out his name. "Mario." Rodriguez smiled and shook the stranger's hand, and Miller showed him his badge. The officers were friendly enough, Rodriguez says. They let him get his meds from the back seat where he'd been keeping his month's supply in case of emergency, such as if ICE came for him. Before they drove him to Portland in handcuffs, periodically making sure he liked the radio station they'd chosen, Miller called the Pacific County Sheriff's Office. Quote, "How's it going this morning?" he asked the dispatcher. Quote, "It's a-going," she responded. "How's it going with you?" "Good. So we were driving through Long Beach and we saw one of our suspects that we were investigating." He chuckled a bit. "So we ended up arresting him," he continued. "We usually try to call you guys ahead of time, but it was just one of those things where..." The dispatcher started laughing. "He just showed up?" she asked. "Pretty much," Miller said, and now they laughed together for a moment, sharing in the serendipity of it all. At the ice field office in Portland, the officers put Rodriguez in a cold room and served him lunch. A burrito. Quote, "Who's going to come get your car from the post office?" he says. Miller asked him. "My brother." "Oh yeah, what's his name? Where's he work?" Rodriguez began to respond until he realized that this, like so many other interactions that had once seemed normal, was an exercise in data gathering. Quote, "Do I have to answer that?" he asked. For at least 4 hours, the officers questioned him, most likely entering his answers into a computer application, Enforce, that helps feed a data pool of more than 100 million records called the Enforcement Integrated Database. An actuarial tool in the database, the Risk Classification Assessment, uses details gleaned from a detainee's life, criminal and health history, address, work, and family stability, lack of scars or tattoos or previous deportations to automatically calculate supervision requirements or how much bond he or she should be asked to pay, a decision that would be reviewed by an ERO officer and sometimes an immigration judge. Under Obama, the tool sometimes recommended immediate release for certain people, but under Trump, according to a 2018 Reuters investigation, that option was removed. An ICE spokesperson told Reuters that ICE personnel could still override the tool's assessment. When the paperwork was finally done, Rodriguez said, quote, "A rude woman took over, shuttling him to another detainee, a Guatemalan, into a short white bus with hard plastic seats and bars on its windows. Instead of handcuffs, they had to wear what is known as a three-piece suit, shackles on the wrists and ankles, a metal band around the waist, and chains connecting them all." Rodriguez said the woman wore a uniform of the Geo Group, a $2 billion publicly traded prison operator whose stock price nearly doubled in the past the 3 months after Trump's election. She drove them 3 hours north to a 1,575-bed ICE facility known as the Northwest Detention Center, in a remediated Superfund sludge field in Tacoma, Washington, where Rodriguez would spend most of the next month. He was released pending an appearance in immigration court after posting $7,500 at his bond hearing. It was one of the lowest bonds anyone from Pacific County had paid to that point, but it was his savings for the school he was about to attend, and it was almost everything that he had. 7. Who is this? The dehumanizing nature of America's immigrant detention centers is now well documented. At ICE's geo-run facility in Tacoma, where Diaz and most of Pacific County's other arrestees also ended up, there have been hunger strikes to protest the conditions, and at least one lawsuit is pending over underpayment. Detainees working the usual array of prison-style jobs earn $1 a day. Less well documented is how the ICE detention centers are now engineered to subject immigrants to further surveillance. According to promotional materials for one of the companies that provides technology to ICE facilities, these capabilities include software that can not only record and catalog both sides of a conversation, but also analyze the links between the callers and their recipients. Video and audio calling in ICE facilities is formally provided by an Alabama company called Talton, which holds the federal contract. But the calls run on technology from the San Francisco company Telmate, which licenses to Talton, the same platform it sells to hundreds of jails and prisons in America's criminal justice system. Telmate is a subsidiary of GTL, a technology firm that American Securities, a private equity company, picked up for about $1 billion in 2011. It follows a recognizable version of the Silicon Valley business model. Its users, inmates, detainees, and their families and friends get convenience in the form of calls, video chats, voicemail messages, photo sharing, and text messaging, while its real clients, prisons and law enforcement, get user data. Telmate's privacy policy tells its inmates and their friends and family members to assume that all communications will be accessed, reviewed, analyzed, searched, scrutinized, rendered searchable, compiled, assembled, accumulated, stored, used, and transferred. Its web-based surveillance software, which it promotes as free to guards and investigators with every install, includes call pattern analysis, relationship analysis, and tools for data visualization. A spokesperson for Telmate said, quote, "We defer to Talton and its customer as to know how they configure the licensed technology. ICE would not comment on its monitoring of detainees' calls or its officers' use, if any, of Telmate's free investigative tools." It likewise declined to comment about any cell phone forensics it may or may not perform, though the agency has options if it wants to scan an immigrant's phone. As Forbes reported, HSI paid millions of dollars to two leading phone hacking companies, Cellebrite and Grayshift, and if it needs to tap a phone line, it may be able to do so. It also has a contract with Penlink, which makes call interception tools. In Pacific County, many people suspected ICE was interested in their phones. One resident told me she had noticed something unusual when her husband was behind bars in Tacoma. His phone was confiscated. He periodically showed up as logged into Facebook. The oddest story came from Mario Rodriguez. One evening, a few days after his release, Rodriguez missed a call from a fellow detainee who was still inside and needed a favor. To help the young man, Rodriguez had to get his alien number, or A number, a tracking code DHS assigns to non-citizens. Knowing that the young man's girlfriend, who was named Evelyn, regularly checked his Facebook account for him, Rodriguez sent a message to the account, Necesito el número de A. The message was time-stamped at 7:10 p.m. At 7:11 p.m., Rodriguez's iPhone buzzed, not with a Facebook message, but a text. Quote, "Who is this?" the person wrote in English. "This is Mario," Rodriguez answered, explaining that he was the detainee's friend from Tacoma. Quote, "This is Justin," the stranger replied. "I'm from Longview, a town just outside Pacific County." The stranger's number, indeed, had a local area code and Longview prefix. Quote, "I apologize," Rodriguez wrote. "I thought this was a response from a text message I sent from Facebook." Quote, "And I thought this was a chick named Evelyn who might be able to help me obtain something," wrote Justin. Rodriguez wondered how the stranger knew Evelyn's name and how he had his phone number, and suddenly he was scared again, fearing he would become the collateral in another digitized sting. Quote, "I'm sorry," he wrote. "I don't know her. Bye." Justin's number wasn't linked to any person on Spokio or Nexus, or to anyone on Facebook, or even to any name in the constantly updating files of some of the commercial data brokers ICE itself uses, which is unusual if he truly exists. Later calls and texts to the number would receive no response. There was a generic recording in English and Spanish. Quote, "The person you're trying to reach is not accepting any calls at this time." But at least Justin, like many of the strangers lately haunting Pacific County, was polite. Quote, "It's all good," he messaged Rodriguez. "She sold me cheap cell phones. Bye." 8. Mission Critical. Amid the sea of acronyms in Officer Miller and Dietz arrest reports from Pacific County, claims, CIS, IDENT, NCIC, TECS, one database name sticks out, CLEAR, short for Consolidated Lead Evaluation and Reporting. While other databases the officers list are in some ways unsurprising, they're mostly federal government systems that run, sometimes ploddingly, on mostly federal government data. CLEAR, a sleek commercial product of Thomson Reuters, is different. CLEAR is powered by personal information, data from credit agencies, cell phone registries, social media posts, property records and utility accounts, phishing licenses, internet chat rooms, and bankruptcy filings, all fused and vetted by algorithms to form an ever-evolving 360-degree view of U.S. residents' lives. The Wall Street Journal once memorably dubbed such commercial data brokers, quote, "Big Brother-in-law." While public attention has lately focused on the Silicon Valley spy contractor Palantir, which in September was in the process of renewing a 3-year, almost $50 million contract with HSI, investigative products like CLEAR have received relatively little scrutiny, but ERO has called Thomson Reuters services, quote, "mission critical." A key benefit of CLEAR, even after Trump's 2017 executive order exempted most foreign visitors and immigrants from the Privacy Act, is that it isn't restricted by protections on what data the government can collect or keep, because it isn't government-owned. It has real-time access to address and name change data from credit reports to motor vehicle registrations in 43 U.S. states, plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. Its utility records, which came from more than 80 electric, gas, water, telephone, cable, and satellite television companies nationwide, are updating daily, making it hard for immigrant families or anyone else to move into a new home without detection. Incarceration and arrest records, often paired with booking photos that allow for facial recognition-powered virtual lineups, arrive almost immediately from 2,100 state and local agencies. Some of the jail and arrest data comes from Thomson Reuters' agreement with a company called Appriss Safety, which runs the database Justice Exchange, now known as Justice Intelligence. The database includes a spite of Inslee's sanctuary order bookings from all over Washington state. A second clear agreement is with Vigilant Solutions, which, according to a 2017 news release, allows Thomson Reuters to investigate its license plate data into Clear, or integrate its license plate data into Clear. In fact, ICE's contract isn't directly with Vigilant. The agency's subscription fees, averaging more than $2 million a year, go to the Thomson Reuters subsidiary, West Publishing. Dude, how long is this fucking article? Oh, Jesus Christ, I got another 3 pages to go. I think we can break it off there. It just gives you a whole idea of what's going on. But yeah, why not? I'll keep going. Where are we at here? Yeah. As described by Reveal, a publication put out by Center for Investigative Reporting, Thomson Reuters Services for ICE also includes a custom job the agency has described as, quote, a continuous monitoring and alert system to track 500,000 identities per month. It notifies ERO's Target Operation Division with every change, quote, in the target's identifiers. Thomson Reuters government work, which its chief financial officer highlighted in an August 2018 earnings call, has been a strong driver of growth, including options. Its standing contracts with ICE are now worth at least $30 million. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off right here because it's just intel about the shit in the background. But basically, the point I'm trying to get at with reading this out here is that this is not going to stop with illegal aliens. Pretty soon they're going to be, if they haven't already, wait a minute. If they haven't already, they're going to be applying this shit to individuals such as you and me. Not just illegal aliens. Let's see what the comments are like on this thing. And Tijet says, as a citizen who is deeply concerned about privacy issues, big data, facial and voice recognition, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, I am deeply, deeply concerned about the process described throughout this article of the long reach of data information sharing. Not only those things, but the manpower that's required to keep track of, spy on, and ferret out undocumented immigrants must be huge, and the needs for more must be bottomless. What will the future bring? Will 1 out of 3 citizens be part of a surveillance team watching their other citizens for any reason deemed necessary by their deep state? That might be Stephen Miller and Donald Trump's ultimate goal, as those two know no shame whatsoever. But the saddest part of this excellent investigative journalism article is the devastating effects on the children of the immigrants. Dude, no. It's on you. Fuck. Let me see here. I'm just reviewing some of these. Here we go. M. Downey says, anyone that places any value on privacy, has any concerns about the role that Big Brother and what the fruits of unbridled data collection can look like, should find this article terrifying. What happens when it becomes the work of the morality police? Think it can't happen to America in the 21st century? Think again. That's what I'm saying. Let's see here. Relatively sparsely populated, blah, 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 in 2008. Mainstream Roblox, get up involved in Roblox? No. Here we go. Dave says, leaving aside the immigration issue for a moment, what's most striking about this article is the sheer amount of sensitive personal data that the government either has or has access to about law-abiding citizens. It appears dangerous in the extreme if somebody in the government were to abuse the powers of their offices. With extraordinary power comes extraordinary responsibility. These agencies and their shadowy private sector collaborators need to be brought into the light, forced to disclose their secret databases and how and why they are used, and subjected to strict regulation by Congress and their agencies' inspectors general, so as to ensure the rights of the law-abiding citizens are being protected. Yeah, damn right. Let's see here. Yeah, anyway, let's go ahead and close this episode out here. But, I mean, you get the point. You know, you get the point where these abuses are not going to stop with illegal immigrants. This is just like the beachhead. This is just like point zero on the map where it all starts and spreads from. Although I would argue that happened a long time ago, but this particular point zero has happened, and where it's going to actually lead, I don't think anybody knows. But I will say this: it won't stop at illegal immigrants. It's going to go to political dissidents. It's going to go to business competitors, and we're going to see some real fuckery happen. And this is just going to be pale by comparison. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down into some music. And I'm not entirely sure where I want to go from there. But, let's go with a little bit of Sepultura territory here on Coin Metal. And that was Clutch with Escape from the Prison Planet. God damn, don't we need one of those. Anywho, we are coming down to the close, but there was a bunch of stuff I wanted to stuff in here. I don't know. I'm trying to think of which one to cover first, though. I think this will just fit in the amount of time that we have. And it's something that I kind of wanted to get to. See, all this total information awareness, it's got motivating factors. Okay, and not all of them are terrorism and whatnot related. A lot of them are money related, meaning who has what, right? So we know who we can tax more, right? And so I think that when they use these tools after they've matured them on tracking down illegal immigrants and whatnot, that they're going to use them in other areas. And I believe at one point or another, financial regulation is going to be one of those realms. If it's not already, I believe it's going to become. And when it does, I think we're going to find out exactly who has had their pants down this whole time. And so this is on zerohedge.com. Quote, "Everyone owns the same stuff." This is by Tyler Durden. It's authored on October 2nd, 2019 at 3:45 p.m. A little over a month ago, we warned that hedge fund crowding, especially within momentum stocks, had emerged as, quote, one of the biggest market risks. And just a few days later, we got the infamous factor crash, as momentum/low beta stocks plunged as value/most shorted names exploded higher, in the process wiping out most year-to-date gains for the most popular hedge fund factor while the surge in the most hated trade meant that countless hedge funds were left flat for the year after spending double-digit gains just days earlier. Yet, while the violent moves underscored just how illiquid and ephemeral the market has become and how quickly even the most profitable trades can reverse, the bigger problem revealed by the quant quake, which saw the biggest two-day losses for sector-neutral momentum factors ever, what events of early September demonstrated is just how great a risk position crowding has become for asset managers. Commenting on precisely this risk, Bank of America has published a new report in which it warns, quote, the diversification benefits of investing in different types of asset managers may be more limited than usual, simply because, quote, everyone now owns the same stuff. Specifically, in addition to maintaining their now traditional biases toward growth and away from value and yield, B of A finds that, quote, the overlap between the 50 largest stock exposures hit record levels this year. This happened as hedge funds cut their net exposure to utilities, where they have been overweight in the first half of this year, down to underweight 0.90x, similar to the longs-only persistent underweight in bond proxy sectors. The key difference between LOs and HFs resides in the cyclical versus defensive exposure. Hedge funds are far more defensively positioned than LOs, and are one standard deviation below their long-term average exposure to cyclical versus defensive sectors. Incidentally, for those asking which stocks have had the most overlap between long-only funds and hedge funds, the answer is shown in the charts below. Now, let's see, the first one is United Airlines Holdings. Not too bad. Meanwhile, despite the recent quant fireworks, B of A finds that even though active managers have historically maintained a bias towards high growth and low yield, the deviation between the two has hit a new record on Monday. Specifically, among large-cap, long-only funds, dividend yield is now the third most neglected factor of 47 factors the bank tracks, while long-term growth is one of just 3 factors where LOs maintain an overweight 1.09x. In short, last month's quant quake, while historic, is just the start of what will be a series of violent, massive market reversals as investors find out that if everyone owns the same things, there's nobody left to buy when everyone starts selling at the same time. Ooh, yeah, that could be inconvenient as hell. Let's see what the comments are. Angelo Jamaica says, we all own your wife's ass. Yes. Angelo Jamaica also says, the bullshit mindset, LOL, everyone owns the same stuff. What a fucked up group of people. I do not own any of your fucked up stuff. But hey, I know you would not understand this because that is what freedom is all about. Being free and not contracted. You stupid dumb asses. Let's see here. See if there's anything good here. Here we go. Blank Fuck says, Fed fucktarts, we need more Ponzi for the buybacks on the same stuff stocks. Please, it shows better earnings per share. Please, buybacks. Subsidize the companies today. Print DAT's Ponzi and hand it over now. Yeah, that's interesting there. Namrider says, Ami thinks, quote, they own the same stuff literally, not figuratively. As suggested in the article, stocks and bonds, yes, treasuries too, are rehypothecated. No one knows who owns what, and it is all, quote, owned by several people. Repo operation, guess what? That collateral being posted for FRNs is owned by multiple banks. Banks know this. They can't trust one another as they are all insolvent in reality. When this becomes widely known, 100% of confidence in the system will be gone. Hope you're all prepared. Goddamn right. Anyway. So to what end? We're going to be tracking everything, but what happens when what you're tracking catches up to you? That is the big question, and I think we're actually going to find that one out. That between attacks on opponents, financial supporters in political regimes, like we're coming up with an election here in the United States, so we're definitely going to be seeing a lot of mudslinging going on. And I believe at the moment there is several points where the apparatuses that are keeping up both Democratic and Republican candidates are being disassembled at this moment. When you see all this stuff about pedos and whatnot, that's just surface stuff. What's below the surface is who those people were funding. And we've already talked about the possibility of that pedo money having come into crypto, and I would be really surprised if it were any other way. Anyway, it is with that I'd like to close out this episode. And thank you very much for listening. It's certainly, I certainly do appreciate the support. We will be back again on Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So until then, I want y'all to trade safe, do your homework, and watch out for your own bunghole, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And as far as our last dance goes, I'm going to throw down a little bit of 9 Inch Nails here. Big man with a big gun. Last dance here on Coin Metal. Thank you again for listening, and you all have an excellent evening. Good night.